Hey, welcome back to 5 and 25. This is episode 20, Romans chapter 8. If a person accepts Christ, becomes a Christian, wants to be a follower of Jesus, has the Holy Spirit, why is there still a struggle between how a person wants to live or thinks they ought to live and how they actually live? Romans 8 talks about this. We are in the letters section of the Bible. So after Christianity started, people began, and the persecution happened. People began to travel all over the region to different cities and places, maybe on horseback, like we tried to illustrate last video. Paul was one of those. The man in the last video is also known as Paul, and he would go from place to place. He'd plant churches, and then oftentimes he would write letters to those churches. Romans is one of those letters. It was meant to encourage the believers and address different issues that were going on. One of those issues is, why do I still struggle with sin if I'm a follower of Jesus? Now, so this Tyvek suit is intended to illustrate what this chapter talks about. Now, in the chapter, you're going to see it'll talk about the sinful nature, or the flesh, or sin, or death, or it'll use those phrases. So think Tyvek suit when you did that we are sinners and that we struggle with sin. But now, when a person accepts Christ, something new happens. Okay, there's a transformation that takes place, and God. We're born again, we're saved, we've been using those phrases, and now we have a new nature. So God He does something new in us. And in addition to the new nature, He gives us the Holy Spirit. So everything ought to be great, right? We ought to easily follow God and live a different life and never sin. But unfortunately, the flesh is still hanging on, okay? So we still live in this fleshly body that has sin tendencies and desires, and there's a struggle in the Christian life. The struggle to want to live according to our new nature and still be struggling with the flesh. And this chapter illustrates that. So as you read through this, and this is one of the more difficult chapters to actually read and follow, just think they are comparing the old life in the flesh to the new life in the Spirit. The other thing I want to point out, and this is a great part of this chapter, again, Paul was writing to try to encourage the believers, and there's some things that are really going to be really encouraging. And just because you're following Jesus doesn't mean that you're not going to have hardship and suffering. And so Paul was trying to encourage those who were suffering. In verses 15 through 17, he talks about our adoption, that we're children of God, and accepted, even heirs with Christ. In verse 28, he says that God works for the good of those who follow Him and are called according to His purpose. So God is working for the good in your life. In verse 31, if God's for us, who can be against us? Wow, who could ever stop this? And in verse 39, that nothing can separate us from the love of God. That's good news, and it's encouraging to our faith. So in a lot of these letters, and we'll see more of this in the next episode, there are things written for our instruction and for our encouragement as well. We'll see you in the next episode. God bless.